and scale them up. Too much time is lost in talking about pilots that remain standalone pilots. Secondly, private sector. I've heard a lot in recent years on how the private sector is willing, and I'm fully convinced, yet they need very often the right governance framework, they need to know which partnership they are part of, and they need scalable and callable projects where governments, such as mine, can guarantee the risks. The onus should not be on the developing or highly indebted country to also guarantee the risk. This is where I think we sometimes fail to connect the dots. Now, last but not least, governments. We need to really make serious business out of onward lending of the SDRs. We also need to increase the SDRs. We need to provide the additional finance. Now, as a Minister of Finance, of course, my other hat, I'll tell you, this is not a very popular theme. Everybody nods, yes, very important. No, we agree with Mrs. Kaag. But then it's either cost-cutting or it's increase of taxation or other means of financial availability. And this is where domestic audiences suddenly become reticent. This is where political will comes in, to make this a shared agenda for all of us. It's not easy, it can be done. We actually won elections on this ticket in the Netherlands last time round. I don't think we'll do as well this time, but still, it can be done. Innovation, an obvious one. Blended finance mentioned. Green bonds. We were the first AAA rated country that issued green bonds. We can assist other countries, but we also need to find ways for many of the developing countries to issue their own green bonds to also provide for the domestic resource mobilization that needs to happen as part of accountability. The sensitive topic of loss and damage, I look forward to the discussion at the COP28 because I think there's a fair claim that has been put forward. Now the negotiations will see how far we'll go. I think the political symbolism of the discussion is equally important if we talk about equity and a shared agenda. Now last but not least, carbon tax and carbon pricing. Very, very important. Unless you price it, unless you tax it, it often has little meaning. The only way to change behavior, productivity, the way we produce and consume, particularly at the large emitting countries, is if we price it more and we make that part of a global public good. But that's part of a discussion. Last but not least, together with my friend and colleague, Minister of Finance of Indonesia, I co-chair the Global Coalition of Ministers of Finance for Climate Action. So a 1-second pitch, all Ministers of Finance, if not in the room, join this coalition. Make your budgets work for climate action. This is where the duty and opportunity of care lies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the illuminating comments. I see there is no actually night and day between what the African leaders are saying and what you've said. Let me now go to Francia, the Vice President. From Colombia, from Meru, and then exported to Colombia. We share the same heritage, and incidentally, the same problems. We understand ourselves. We understand the burden we are carrying. We understand the challenges the climate has posed on us. So, looking from where you are inside and listening to our leaders and also the Deputy Prime Minister from Netherlands, what would be your suggestion, especially from your experience in Latin America and the Caribbean? Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. In the first place, I must say that Latin America and the Caribbean are experiencing the pressures of powerful economies that want to continue exploiting our natural resources. And this pressure of exploiting our natural resources contribute to increasing the climate crisis. There are very few the governments who are taking up the decarbonized economy, an economy that makes a transition and a transformation in this matter. Obviously, in low-income countries, the vulnerable countries, or the middle-income countries like the Latin American countries, this is a great challenge because we have based our economy on extraction. We have based our economy on carbon, to coal. In my country, we are the first alternative government, and we are creating a change in the laws and also a change of paradigms, in social paradigms, because we have to create awareness that contributing to the exploitation that accumulates capital but does not generate well-being and that destroys the ecosystem is not a path that we accept. In this sense, we want to make a transition, and as I had said before, we have serious problems, serious financial problems, which in some way do not allow us to resolve the challenges of the effects of the climatic crisis. But in the case of Colombia, we have a conflict, a social conflict, an armed conflict, a war which we are experiencing, which contributes to exacerbate this situation of vulnerability in our country. And in this sense, I think that we have an increase of the debts with very high interest rates that do not allow that within our country we can have the necessary resources to invest in these proposals for energy transition and actions for mitigation and adaptation to the climate change. This will not change if we continue with the current financial system, as I have said, which has a colonialist point of view. The financial system, the international financial system that we have today, is one that does not allow justice, social justice, and neither does it allow for climatic justice. In our countries, the basic needs are not satisfied. So, and there are lots of needs. We are one of the countries where there are the most inequalities in the planet. Sometimes we have to not invest socially in drinking water, in health, in electricity, and connectivity in order to use these resources from the treasury to pay the external debts, which, as I was telling you, has very high interest rates with respect to countries which do not have the same conditions that we have. In this sense, we have spoken about exchange of debt for climate action with new rules, not the same traditional rules, because this problem, which is not a traditional way of carrying out things, we have to innovate with new actions, new rules. The financial system today does not help us to face the challenges of climate change. It's not a system that was created for us, and it's not a just system for our countries. And in this sense, we have come to present a multilateral agreement because this is already a global crisis that requires a global response. And that means that, as we had done during the pandemic, we can do, or maybe in this multilateral agreement, we can do what was done during the pandemic, to issue special rights that can allow the vulnerable countries and the middle-income countries to generate conditions of flexibility in regard to their debts and to free resources to invest in our lands, in our communities, in our nations. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to care for this situation. This is a proposal which President Gustavo Petro has presented to the world, and we agree with President Ruto about the need to reform the financial system, the qualifiers of debt, increase the crisis, because in a catastrophic situation of our country, the risk rating makes it more difficult to access to credit, which allows us to finance these programs. Therefore, we are in a situation of inequality, and which has some effects that are higher than those of other countries that are in better economic conditions. And this implies that we have to think that Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa should unite with one voice and to present in a very specific way what we have been doing to reform the financial system so that our countries we can access to better conditions of social and climatic justice.
Thank you very much, Vice President Francia, for those comments and insights. Let me now go to Abudamo. Mo, I will call you a private sector person, a businessman, and a philanthropist. So you straddle all. So you have been campaigning for good governance, campaigning for climate justice, and so on. As we gather here to have a common view, a common position for Africa as we prepare to go to COP28, and having listened to everybody here, from your perspective as a philanthropist, as a businessman, what would you like to add? Or what do you think we should not take with us to the world? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. I really have 4 points to make. And the first one really is there is a silver bullet to solve this problem. And we are just like dodging all that to talk about, how we can get more money for climate finance. Just tax carbon. Use the market. You guys in the rich countries taught us about, you invented capitalism, invented market. Why aren't you applying market forces to carbon? Why? And that is the question, because the problem now is that people make promises. Those poor guys in Africa and somewhere else, they have a problem there. Okay, well, we are kind people, we're going to offer them some money. How about $100 billion for climate fight? But then, actually, things are tight. Sorry, we cannot make it this year. Well, in those guys' mind, it's charity. It's charity. And that's a mistake. It should not be charity. This should be an international clear agreement. You break it, you own it. That is the honest answer. Without changing the market dynamic, will not change. Now, every American, man, woman, child, emits 17 tons every year. Every European, 6.5 to 7 tons a year. China, same. Now, the question here, excuse me, who gave you the right to use all this amount of carbon? We are 8 billion people in this planet. Science tells us we cannot emit more than 24 billion tons a year. That's 3 tons per head. 3 tons per head. Who gave the Americans the right to do 17? Who gave the Europeans the right to do 7? Why? You pay for it. If you pay for it, then you change. Then you cannot change behavior unless you pay for it. The only problem is that we have very few statesmen. We have many politicians, very few statesmen. President Juncker, who is the president of the European Union a few years ago, said something very beautiful, actually. He said, you know what? All of us politicians, we know what to do. But we don't know how to get elected if we do it. And that is a problem. That is a problem. We have a lot of politicians who want to be elected, but nothing will happen then. So nothing happens. So we must fight for carbon tax. I love what the Deputy Prime Minister said about that. And the first time I hear a senior European politician say that. Look, soon there's going to be a seat available for the Prime Minister in your country. I hope you get it. Anyway, because that's honorable of you to say that. Those guys are in denial. Who puts all this carbon up there? Who put it up? Own it. You need to own what you break something, you do it. That's the first point. Without carbon tax, everything else is charity. It doesn't work. That's one thing. Second thing, we talk about investments in Africa and green investment. We have been talking about investment in Africa for ages, but nobody invests in Africa. Tricky. Simple reason, it is impossible to invest in Africa. If all this rating agency rate you guys as junk, you are sub-grade investment. Who's going to invest here? Most of the money out there, private money, is in pension funds, insurance companies. By law, they cannot invest here. By law. If I'm running an insurance company and I want to put $1 billion, and a lot of those people are nice people, they want to invest in Africa. But they say, look, if I invest $1 billion, I have to put another $1 billion here as a security because I'm sorry, but you are sub-grade. You are not investable grade for me. This system is broken. It has to be sorted out. And this rating agency, they all have one office in South Africa, as if South Africa is Africa, 54 countries. They sit in South Africa and pontificate about all of Africa. Again, those guys act as auditors, and guess what? They sell consultancy for African countries about how to improve their grade. Excuse me? This is a clear conflict of interest. You cannot grade people and you go and say, I offer you consultancy how to improve your grade. Excuse me? People go to prison for that. Anyway, so that is something about the rating agency. It has to be sorted out. Then we come to this multinational. I'm amazed about the lack of governance in the World Bank and the IMF. And, I told Ajay and Kristalina the other day, we were all in Paris for a meeting. I said, you guys, if you're running or your banks are listed in any decent stock exchange, you will have been delisted because your governance sucks. Can you have a listed company? Can you have any bank in the world without senior independent directors? Where are the independent directors in the World Bank? None. It's the shareholders major shareholders hug it. Where is the independent directors? Where is the voice of the other countries? Fine, major shareholders keep 60%, 70% of the shares. Fine, but let some fresh air in the room. Get some independent directors in the room. Otherwise, your governance sucks. You'll be delisted. Something else gross really happening in this institution. Do you know that this is the only banks in the world where the board sits in the headquarters? They sit in the headquarters with their staff. And I asked Ajay, how you run your business? You are the president of this institution, and you have this board and their staff living on top of you, running around, telling the staff what to do, lobbying for their countries, whatever interest. No, don't give loan to this guy. Hey, you must give that. What is this? This is breach of basics of good governance. Do you know how much it costs the World Bank to keep those guys in residence? Every year, it is over $100 million. Do you know that? $100 million to house the board and their staff every year. Excuse me, what is the job of the World Bank? To eradicate poverty? $100 million every year would have educated 1 million kids in Egypt every year. Why those guys sit there spending $100 million? This is the issue of governance. It has to be addressed. I'll stop here.
Well, thank you very much for bringing the private sector angle, the market angle to the discussions. But the good thing is that it somehow aligns with the suggestions that have all come here. What I get from that, because it helps me to summarize, is that the carbon tax is an agenda that must be taken from here to COP28. And I also agree with it as a banker because you are right. You use tax and subsidies to make sure that you direct certain actions where you want them to go. So I think that's one of the things. And there's also a consensus on reforming the international financial architecture. I don't want to call it architecture. The way the international financial system operates. And that's not just the multilateral. You touched on even the rating agencies. People can also talk about how the stock exchanges operate, if you want to extend it to all those. So I think a comprehensive approach to it is important. And as I agree, that the part of the problem is that the negotiations we have is David and Goliath negotiation. Incidentally, the person we should be telling to do more is the Goliath. And the others are the Lilliput, who really should be treated more fairly. But your voice can't rise to that level. But by coming together as Africans, coming together with the Caribbean, Latin America, and having politicians like the Deputy Prime Minister, I think we can start forming a consensus, which started last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. For the first time, loss and damage came on the table. It means some progress is being made. It's a common problem for everybody, and we must make sure we all work together, rich and poor, those who emit and those who don't emit, to make sure we solve it. So thank you. I would now invite, I think, President Ruto to say the last word.
Maybe just three things. I want to agree with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance that in this debate, there are no sides. We are on the same side. And we need to begin to drive this from the same side, because the risk that we face when this place burns, it will burn with everybody. The emitters and the non-emitters, the people from the south and the people from the north. That is settled. And because of that, we need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. We need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. Whether it is carbon tax, and then I believe that conversation is overdue. If we will not be having a conversation about carbon tax in COP27, and not just that conversation, on the mechanism of the how, and with a proper timeline, then we will not have a meaningful conversation. Number two is the conversation around rating agencies. Credit rating agencies are destroying our economies. We have to be honest with them. Their algorithm is faulty. They are not using empirical science. And I'm saying this as a scientist myself. There is a problem, a big problem with credit rating agencies. And in some instances, they are conflicted. And there must be a candid conversation about their data, their findings, and whether they are doing the right thing. And finally, is to say, as Africa, we will be putting together the Nairobi Declaration that is going to be candid, bold, and practical for us to carry that conversation into the UN General Assembly and into COP28.
We are all on the same side. If we burn, everyone burns. His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, thank you so much for that conversation, wonderfully hosted by Professor Benedict Orama. Thanks everyone for a great discussion. And to Mo Ibrahim, if you break it, you own it. And reminding us too that there actually is a silver bullet, carbon tax, which His Excellency President Ruto said really has to be on the agenda at COP, regardless of whether it's a David and Goliath negotiation. Today, government leaders have been gathering here to discuss a vision for a greener future. A private sector declaration was signed under the leadership of Equity Group and Dr. James Mwangi, together with international collaborators such as the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, the East African Business Council, and the Africa Business Leaders Coalition of the UN Global Compact, among others. This declaration in support of government is a commitment to combating climate change by the private sector, which acknowledges the importance of coordination between the public and private sectors to achieve the shared goal of climate action for resilience and green growth. Alongside the Nairobi Declaration, this private sector statement will be heard during the upcoming United Nations General Assembly, the World Bank, IMF, Marrakesh meetings, and at COP28 as the private sector voice of Africa, offering its own commitment to responsible solutions related to climate change. I'd like now to introduce Dr. James Mwangi, Group MD and CEO of Equity Group Holdings, for more to discuss on the global finance architecture and the private sector's point of view. Please, everyone, a very warm applause and welcome to Dr. James Mwangi.
Hey, bana ba Kenya namukesenti mulembe gundi oya mumbe kama rumwelezera ko bulayi bwo kubanenda kamatunda ko buru mu Kenya oya mumbe kama rumwelezera ko bulayi bwo kubanenda kamatunda.
Thank you very much for a great day. I commend all of you for your patience. I assure you, Your Excellency, President Ruto, that we have heard you, and we want now to give the multilateral development banks an opportunity to respond. We want to give the global financial experts an opportunity. They have been in the room. They have heard what has been said, and hopefully they can give us their way forward to the issues that has been raised by the African leaders and the private sector. Without much ado, I want to invite Dr. Akiumi Adesina. If Adesina, you are present. Quickly, Honorable Silusua, Minister of State for Development, Franconia and International Partnerships. Honorable Babel Kolfa, Parliamentary State Secretary, German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Alexia Tutor, Assistant Secretary of International Trade and Development, U.S. Secretary, U.S. Treasury. Body Deputy Managing Director, International Monetary Fund. And last but not least, Axel Van, Senior Managing Director, World Bank. Thank you very much for leader being patient this afternoon. It was really great listening to the African leaders on the issues of finance. It's apparent that the big elephant in the room is finance. And it appears that the ball has been pushed to the court of the multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. I seem here to have truly the shareholders, if I may say, of those institutions, the policy decision makers. And we want to give them a chance, maybe to respond to the issues the African leaders are raising, to respond to the issues that the private sector, Mo Ibrahim, has articulated, the issues of the private sector. And broadly, if I may summarize so that we have a common understanding, of the issues that has been raised. There is the issue of accessibility of finance and speed to which disbursements are made. There is a big issue of affordability, at what cost. His Excellency President Ludo said Africa pays at least 5 times. And the rationale there has been questioned because it's not an African risk. It's a global climate risk that we are talking about.
And multilateral development banks to become more adaptive and innovative in structuring loans and debt servicing for countries affected by climate disasters, or caused by developing economies for the reform of the G20 Common Framework to give voice to the global South. The challenge remains the difficulty of moving from words to action. It is estimated that Africa will require about $200 billion per annum to achieve SDGs by 2030. Another $160 billion will be required for African countries to pursue loss and damage mitigation and adaptation.